Welcome back to Language of the Soul, Conversations on Healing and Growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
So, as the new year has begun, looking at it through the lens of the lunar year and the year of the dragon, traditionally, I've been having some very significant, very consistent conversations with friends of mine around trusting themselves, honoring themselves. There's this sense that I get from a lot of the writers, filmmakers, and actors that are in my circles that there has been this idea, this understanding of trusting oneself, honoring oneself, but it's been very cognitive based. It's not really that knowing, grounding, action oriented space. And as you have been writing about honoring the inner muse, I really love that phrasing. And so I want to begin there with this notion of the inner muse.
Right. So the muse, as I'm relating it in my most recent blog and newsletter, is titled No Longer Riding on the Merry-Go-Round, Manifestation and the Inner Muse. I draw upon a quote to start the piece off from John Lennon. It's actually from his last album in that time prior to his death. And the lyric I share is, I'm just sitting here watching the wheels go round and round. I really love to watch them roll. No longer riding on the merry-go-round. I just had to let it go. And what's interesting about the quote is, from my perspective, isn't so much that John's checking out of life, which I think it was often the narrative. Oh, in order to be in connection with yourself, with the inner muse, you have to check out. You have to remove yourself from life. I would offer that it's something very, very different that unfolds, that what you're really doing is revealing something. So when we use the word manifest, we're talking about, the definition for manifest being to be made clear. But we really don't initially talk about, well, what are we making clear? And I would offer that if we're going to look at it through the lens of a soulful perspective, it's really what gets revealed to us as our lives unfold. In other words, what are we revealing about ourselves? Most importantly to ourselves, but also to the world around us. How does what we're doing show up, right? To me, that's an expression of the muse more than this notion of, oh, can I trust myself or not? And I get the conversation that you're encouraging us to go into, which is, can I trust my heart? Can I trust myself to take good care of my needs? The conversation that I would offer is largely missing on a larger scale is, am I in connection with a practice that reveals my wisdom or my practice with wisdom to me and to those around me?
A lot of people in the early days of meditation practice, of breath practice, really compartmentalize it's the time to do this, and then I go off and do the rest of my life. And I find that as a practitioner of meditation, and in particular with the Tao Yin techniques that you and I have worked on together, that practice, the microcosmic orbit, the meditation is not just a designated time during the day. There's this sense of the wisdom always being present, the wisdom always being accessible from this wonderful depth. And I think for me in my journey, it's knowing that the depth isn't some notion of I have to really, 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 really work hard. It's letting go into the depths.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit and start by offering a quote that appears in the blog/newsletter. and it's from Marcus Aurelius, 2,000 years ago, Roman emperor, that presents this path of and practice. And he describes it as what stands in the way is the way. Now, it sounds initially very esoteric. It sounds on some level a bit of a heady notion. But in practice, it's really something very practical within the practice of presence, in the sense that the practice of being present, in other words, breath sweeps mind, but what happens after that when one is quiet? Well, one practices in presence with whatever's right in front of you. As Marcus Aurelius is putting it, what stands in the way is the way. Allow that to be, as mundane as it might be, the revealing moment about who you are. In other words, how does what's standing in my way, what does it reveal within me around how to heal and grow? If the framing is always, and from a soulful perspective it always is, around healing and growth, then what stands in the way isn't always an opportunity to heal, to grow. But the nature of it is obviously going to inform us in different ways. Within the writing, within the essay, I talk about this transition within me from becoming or from being an acupuncturist, an herbalist who teaches meditation and consciousness classes, teaches Qigong, to being someone whose teaching has become the centerpiece of what I share with others. And not as a label, not even as an identity, but as a natural expression in some ways of the quote. What stood in the way for me, not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity, was for me to continue to grow into what I do today through the language of the soul work that I do with students, right? So that's what stood tall in the way. It's often framed in the popular culture, that quote, what stands in the way, is how do we relate to our obstacles? How do we overcome obstacles? And I would offer that Marcus Aurelius was offering something entirely different. He's asking the question, or presenting the opportunity as, here's what's alive, vibrant. Here's what's in your being, what's in your life. How does that feel? How do you relate to it? All of that informs you about what it is. To point to this idea that it need be seen as an obstacle, sure, I'm not saying there aren't things that don't present themselves as challenges. I'm saying it's a way to let go into the path.
How am I healing and growing is another, I think, very simple way of asking a question that then brings about checking in with yourself and that path. You're talking about the fact that there are challenges. It doesn't have to be this unstoppable obstacle. I'm speaking to you from your office at Simplicity Farms Healing and Growth Center, the Learning Center, Creative Center. These are all terms that you've thrown around. It's a very warm and inviting space because of the way that you chose to construct the containers that you adapted and bring all this natural wood into the space, really warm, creating this, expanding your physical space just from the acupuncture room into a classroom, into an office, into this whole complex. That was a challenge. Could you talk a little bit about what that challenge was like, the opportunity that was there to let go?
So, 2012, I've set forth this vision to expand what had been a very small building that had a treatment room, a bathroom, a small waiting room. And I wanted to have a large classroom. I wanted to have a separate office space, a kind of creative space for me personally, as well as a space that I could put an herb room into. And so I embarked upon it. I kind of dove in with this idea of building. What I intended and ultimately created was I took what was in essence three Amish sheds, put a face on the front so that at least from the front, they're very clearly one building, interconnected them, took a lot of recycled material and built it in large measure. With the exception of the HVAC, I built it myself. And so it happened fast. And it also initially was built without a permit. Nearing what I envisioned, a few months into the process, what I envisioned was my completion point. Up pulled a very kind, understanding man from the county, an inspector, in essence saying, "Hey, so do you have a permit for this?" I had this very clear sense from the very moment he pulled up. I needed to be forthwith with him, be very clear. From the moment he pulled up, it felt like this was part of the manifestation process, that what I was creating, and if we take that definition of manifest is, to be made clear, that I needed to be very clear with him. So we walked around the space. He said to me at one point, "I get why you might not have thought that you needed a permit for this, but you do." And that took me on a whole journey that took a year to go from developing the plans with the assistance of Gary Stewing to really reconceiving the notion of what it meant to build the space. And that's really where the notion of significant opportunities for growth stepped in, because I stopped insisting upon this notion that it had to get done as soon as possible. That on some level, the completion of the space or the lack of completion of the space was an obstacle in my life. That it was in some ways blocking me from reaching where I wanted to be, which is teaching classes. I didn't grasp quite to the degree that I needed to how significant the walk and my talk needed to be in alignment in order for me to be out there teaching the work, really walking the work. And so that next year was very immersive as I learned to let go into the creative space, to let go into a playful space, to let go of the notion of artificial deadlines and really listen inwardly to the opportunities to heal and grow. And it was extraordinary. I would not for even a second want anything to be different than how it unfolded. I have no regret over that year invested. It was extraordinary, really quite revealing to me about my own inner journey and what it was that I was called to share with others.
I really hear the significance of this lesson. I mean, you really learned how to let go into that playfulness in a way that is so immediate to me in visiting that space because every little corner has such thoughtful little details. There's some hidden compartments. There's just the way the ceiling almost feels like it's breathing because of the shape of the wood. I don't think that stuff would have been that way had you just gone through it to get to classes right off the bat. I mean, there's that spark of the inner muse, but it was like running a relay race instead of going, I'm going to take this walk through the forest. It's such a grounding, sobering step into the reality of what manifestation actually is. You've used the words airy, fairy way of thinking about this that we can get stuck on in the essay, and that's stood out to me because manifestation is really just the clarity of your intention and stepping into your actions. This podcast really is even a testament of that, where I said, I have an idea for a podcast, And I'd also like to take the opportunity to work on the notion of us doing a podcast together. I think that both of these things will go hand in hand and will allow me the skills and the comfort and the ease and the knowledge to do all of this. So there's that manifestation. Manifestation can sometimes feel very practical in that way. The creativity doesn't leave, but to me, there's this sense of everyday living, every moment unfolding. That's the doorway into manifestation, not being off with your head in the clouds. It really speaks to what John Lennon wrote in Watching the Wheels, being an observer to the experience. He doesn't have to recreate the wheel. It's there. He's patient with it. He has gratitude for it. I really love to watch them roll.
You know, as you speak, I'm very aware that the muse, in many ways, the soulful muse, is literally an experience that exists within its own timetable that will often feel like it gets in the way of our ambition, which, you know, I feel like I articulated in the description of how my relationship to the building of the Healing and Growth Center played out. But leading up to that, and even at the beginning, my ambition wanted to argue with healing and growth in those earlier stages and even along the way. Why is this taking so long? Can't there be a more direct path? And I learned how to practice with those feelings, to not push them away, but give them a place to be heard, but also a place for them to be grieved so that something could arrive in its place that didn't feel like I was having an internal argument, that there was a way for me to be not just patient, but ultimately to let go of all of the notions of when I'm supposed to have something done and all of those kinds of stories that humans, in a broader sense, make up. Even when there is a hard deadline, to maybe let go of, oh, I'm not going to get all that I intended to get done, and that can be okay. Even more so, that it's more than it's just okay, that the journey there was as important as what you got done. And that feels like a most crucial element of the manifestation journey of really, and coming back to that initial question that you ask about trust. Trusting in ourselves to be okay with where we are right now.
If you'd like to read the essay that Martin has written, you can do so by going over to martinperkins.com, martinperkins.com. You're going to find all of the healing and growth modalities present there, whether it's a series of essays in the blog, the book, The Language of the Soul, A Path of Simplicity, and an opportunity to connect with Martin in the course, Language of the Soul, as well as acupuncture and herbs. As always, a pleasure speaking with you, Martin.
Thank you, Ben.
We'll see you next time.